Hi guys, so today we're going over the 0 times table. And a general rule when you're multiplying numbers by 0 is that the answer will always be 0. For example, 2 times 0 is 0. 6 times 0 is 0. 0 times 100 is 0. The answer is always going to be 0. Why is this? Okay, so the next rule or times table that we're going to be going over is the 1 times table. So the rule for this times table is that any number multiplied by 1 is going to be itself. For example, 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 100 is 100. And 1 times 5 is 5. So the next times table rule that we're going to be going over is the rule for the 2 times table. So just in general, any number multiplied by 2 is going to be an even number. And an even number is any number that ends in 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8. So any number multiplied by 2 is going to be an even number. For example, 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 12 is 24. 2 times 30 is 60. They all end in even numbers. 2 times 7, 7's an odd number, but if you multiply 2 by 7, you still get 14, which is an even number.
The next times table that we're going to go over is going to be the 5 times table. So for the 5 times table, it's a really simple rule. All you have to do is if you're multiplying a number by 5, the outcome should always end in 5 or 0. So for example, if you're multiplying 5 by 2, we know that that's 10. And if we're using the rule that Yanni went over, we know that it's right for 2 because it ends in a 0, which is even. But for 5, it ends in the 0. And so we know that that is multiple, that is a multiple of 5. So that works with odd numbers too. So 5 times 7 is 35, and that ends in a 5. We know that any number that doesn't end in 5 or 0 is not divisible by 5. So, if it ends in anything but 1, 2, 3, if it ends in anything other than 5 or 0, then it's not divisible by 5. The next times table we're going to go over is 6. For this one, it's a little trickier, the rule, but whatever your outcome is when you're multiplying by 6, they should always be multiple of 2 or 3. So if you're multiplying 6 by 1, then you get 6, right? And that is also divisible by 2 and 3. So let's do that with the bigger number. If we're multiplying 6 by 5, you get 30, that's right. So for 30, that is a multiple of 2, and we know that because it ends in 0, and it is also a multiple of 3. And so that's how you know that 30 is a multiple of 6. So anytime you're multiplying something by 6, it should always be a multiple of 2 and 3 as well.
Okay, so now to skip over to the 9 times table, an easy trick you can use to multiply any number by 9 is to multiply that number by 10 instead, and then subtract that number. So for example, if you wanted to know what 5 times 9 was, an easier way to solve that is by doing 5 times 10, which you know is 50. And then from there, you can subtract 5 to get 45. And then just for another example, let's say you wanted to do 9 times 11. Instead, you can just do 10 times 11 to get 110. And then subtract 11 from that to get 99. So for the next times table, now we're going to go over the 10 times table. So this one's obviously a lot easier. Any number multiplied by 10 will always end in 0. So for example, 10 times 60 or 6 is just 60. Or 10 times 5 is 50. And for the 10 times table, you can actually multiply any number by 10 just by moving the decimal over 1 point. So again, if you wanted to take 10 times 5 as an example, you can get this answer just by moving the decimal point over 1 digit. And then for the 11 times table, there's also an easy trick that works up until you get to 11 times 10. But 11 times any number up until 9 is just that own number twice. So for example, 11 times 2 is 22. 11 times 4 is 44. And 11 times 8 is 88.
So just to go over factoring and factor review, taking an equation such as 2 times 3 equals 6. 2 would be a factor of 6 and 3 as well. And then 6, you can divide that by 2 or 3, which would make 6 a multiple of 2, or also a multiple of 3. And so there are a couple of rules to go over, and they might seem like a lot at first, but they get a lot easier once you just keep doing it. And so for the first one, multiples of 2 always end in an even number. So for example, if you do 2 times 3 again, 6 is a multiple of 2, and 6 is an even number. Or if you go 2 times 2, 4 is a multiple of 2, and that's an even number as well. And for the second rule, multiples of 3 always have the digits add up to 3, 6, or 9. So for example, if you go 3 times 4, that equals 12. And 1 plus 2 equals 3. Or if you go 3 times 5, that would equal 15. And the digits of 15, 1 plus 5, would equal 6. And that applies to every multiple of 3. The third rule would be multiples of 5 always end in 0 or 5. And so if you go, for example, 5 times 2, that results in 10. And the last digit of 10 is 0. Or if you go 5 times 3, the last digit of 15 would be 5. And it keeps, if you do 5 times 4, if you notice, it keeps switching from 0 to 5 as you go from even to odd numbers as you multiply 5. So the next rule would be that multiples of 6 are only true if they are multiples of 2. And the reason behind this would be that 6 is a multiple of 2. Yeah, so if you go 6 times 3, that equals 18, and 18 is a multiple of 2. Or you can say 6 times 4, that results in 24, and 24 is a multiple of 2 as well. So another rule would be multiples of 6 are only true if they're multiples of 2 and 3. And the reason behind that is 6 is a multiple of 2 and 3, and you can factor that, as we've gone over that before. But so if we say, for example, 6 times 3, that equals 18, and 18 is a multiple of 2, 3, and 3 again. Or if you say 6 times 4, that equates to 24, and 24 is also a multiple of 2 and 3. And the last rule for factoring to remember would be that multiples of 10 always end in 0. And I believe I went over this before, but if you say, for example, 10 times 7, that equals 70, with the last digit being 0.
So hi guys, we're just gonna do some practice problems using the rules that I talked about. So feel free to pause the video and then I will go over the answers. So, okay. So for the first question, 267 times 0, if you remember the rule, anything times 0 is gonna be 0. The explanation for that is if anything times 0 will always be 0. And then for the second question, like we said, the rule was anything multiplied by 2 is always going to be an even number. And although 5 is an odd number, our answer still has to be an even number. So 2 times 5 is 10. 10 ends in 0, which is an even number. So the whole thing is an even number. And yeah.
The 5 times table, let's just go over some practice problems. So for this practice problem, we'll do 5 times 6. Or no, let's do 5 times, we already did that. So let's do 5 times 9. So 5 times 9, I'll give you guys some time to do that. Okay, yeah, it's 45. So, and we know that that's correct because it ends in a 5. Let's do one more practice problem. Let's do 5 times 8. So I'll give you guys some time to do that. 5 times 8 is 40. And we know that's correct because it ends in a 0. So always remember that whenever you're multiplying by 5, it always ends in a 5 and a 0. So let's go over some more practice problems. Let's go over some more practice problems for 6. So for 6, I'll give you guys some problems to practice, and we'll see if you get it correct based on the rules. So let's do 6 times 7. So I'll give you some time to do that. 6 times 7 is 42. So we know it's 42, and we know that that's correct because 42 we know is a multiple of 2 because it ends in an even number. We also know that it's a multiple of 3 because 2 plus 4, the digits are equal to 6. So, and that's how we know that, and 6 is a multiple of 3. And so that's how we know that it is correct. So that's how we know that it is a multiple of 6. One last practice problem is, let's do 6 times 3. That's nice and simple. I'll give you some time to do that. It's 18. Yeah, so if you got that correct, then good job. But let's just go over how it is a multiple of 6. It ends in 8, which is a even number, so we know that it is a multiple of 2, and 8 plus 1 is 9, which is a multiple of 3, which means that it is both a multiple of 3 and 2, which makes it also a multiple of 6, which makes this problem correct.
Okay, so now for a couple examples, I'll go over the 9 times table and the 11 times table. So we'll start with 9 times 7, and we can also do 3 times 11. Okay, so you can go ahead and pause the video if you want to work it out, and now I'm going to go over the answer. So for 9 times 7, based on the trick I explained earlier, you can actually do 7 times 10, which is 70. That looks like plus, that's times. And that's 70. And then you subtract this answer. You subtract 7 from this answer. So that would give you 63, which is the answer. And then for the next question, for 3 times 11, based on the trick I told you before, any number multiplied by 11 before 9 is always that original number twice. So the answer to this would just be 33.
So for the first example, the first practice problem, it would be 3 times 25, which equals, and you can pause right here and then solve it, and then we'll come back to it. So if you got that right, it would be equal 75. And if you add up the digits 7 plus 5, that equals 12. But then you have to keep going, so you add up the digits 1 plus 2, which equal 3. And that is how our rule of multiples of 3 still applies. And now for second practice problem, I'll give you a number, which would be 120. And you can pause the video right here and find the multiples or what 120 factors into. And so if you got this right, it would factor into a multiple of 6, a multiple of 2, a multiple of 10. And you can factor these factors as well. So you can factor 6 into 2 times 3, and you can factor 10 into 5 times 2. So these would be the simplest factors of 120. But you can use your rules from previously to find the factors and what 120 is the multiple of.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to lesson 2. And I think that's it for today's video.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, guys.